This is Democracy Watch. Marc, we have a special one today in that you just came back from arguing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. This is the fifth time that you've argued in front of the Supreme Court in your career. So first and foremost, can you tell us what this case was about and what your takeaway was from the argument?
Yeah, so this is a really important campaign finance case. I've said this before, maps are important to who wins elections, but so is money. And the rules of how we finance our elections, they matter. It matters not just to public confidence in elections. It matters not just to prevent corruption in elections, but it matters to winning and losing. And the Republican Party has been waging a war on our campaign finance system for decades that hasn't gotten enough attention. So this case involves a challenge by the Republican House and Senate committee, as well as Vice President J.D. Vance, adding a little bit of spice to the mix, that challenging the limit on the amount of money that political parties can spend essentially paying the bills of their campaigns, what are called coordinated party expenditures, which, is basically the RNC just picking up the tab for the Trump campaign or the NRSC or the NRCC for House and Senate campaigns.
And so in your argument, was there anything that surprised you in terms of the receptiveness of the justices? Obviously, you have to pick off two conservative judges here.
Yeah, so this is a provision of the law that Republicans have been trying to strike down literally for longer than I've been practicing law. The first effort to strike down this law came out of an ad run in the late 1980s in Colorado. It led to a case called Colorado Republican Party versus FEC, referred to as Colorado 1. Then in 2001, the Supreme Court heard Colorado 2, which was the sequel to that, and it upheld these limits. So these limits have been in place really since the early 1970s, but they were upheld as recently as 2001. And so when the case got granted cert, in other words, the Supreme Court decided to hear the case, the assumption was that the Supreme Court was going to overturn the ruling. The Trump administration wound up bowing out of the case, even though past Republican and Democratic administrations had defended this law. They said they would not defend it. So the Democratic Party stepped forward, and I represent them in defending this law. I think the biggest surprise, in a positive way, was that the justices seemed concerned that they are being essentially bait and switched. In fact, that was a phrase that was used in the courtroom, that Republicans have in the past tried to strike down other provisions of the law and cited this restriction as a reason why the court should feel confident removing other restrictions, and now they're seeking to remove these. And there was a lot of questioning about what will come next. If the court gives the Republican Party what it wants here, will more limits fall next? In other words, will there be more challenges to come? And I think, the answer to that is yes. The Republican Party wants to strike down all limits on money in politics, and it was actually heartening to hear that even a number of the conservative justices asked questions about that and seemed to be concerned.
Is there anything that you can read from the tea leaves in terms of the questioning, or is it completely still uncertain in terms of how they're going to rule?
Look, we've got to be realists about this. The Supreme Court didn't have to take this case. There are 8,000 petitions filed with the Supreme Court, literally 8,000, and they're only hearing about 60 cases a year. And so they didn't have to take this case since the limits are in place, unless there was at least some interest on the court to reverse its prior decision and strike them down. So, I go into this argument assuming that, the court is not with me. It's on the other side. A majority of the justices are going to rule against me. I felt like I got a fair hearing. I felt like there were good questions that were asked, including by a number of the conservative justices. And I think they were a little bit surprised to hear just how blatant the Republican conduct is around these coordinated party expenditures and what it could lead to next. So I'm not predicting we're going to win. I never predict that we're going to win every time. I'm 4-0 in the Supreme Court with this case now, I guess 4-0 and one to be decided. And in none of the past four cases was it assumed that I'd win those cases. Maybe we'll pull this one out as well. But it is hard going in on the side of, in those cases, minority voting rights. In this case, campaign finance. But we'll hope for the best.
I should note for people who are watching right now, Marc is not just fighting for democracy in these videos that we do. He is literally going and arguing in front of the U.S. Supreme Court, in addition to the fact that he is also posting on Democracy Docket, which is the news outlet that he founded to focus on everything voting and elections. And so this is very clearly a voice that we need to elevate in this space. If you haven't yet subscribed to Democracy Docket, I'm going to put the link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. It is a small step we can all take to show some support for his invaluable work. Marc, something that struck me while I was watching was obviously there has to be a reverential tone, a respectful tone when you're dealing with, folks who I think the rest of us out here pretty openly revile, folks like Clarence Thomas and Samuel Alito. And so what is it like in the courtroom to have these figures whose personas are larger than themselves, and yet, in doing the work that you have to do, there is a level of decorum that has to be followed?
Look, first of all, it is an honor to argue in the U.S. Supreme Court. I mean, it is a very impressive courtroom. It's got a lot of history, a lot of tradition. The justices sit very close to you. Like, the thing that I think most people are surprised when they come to the Supreme Court is just how close the advocates are from the justices. And the justices sit there, they're in black robes, and you stand when they walk in and you call them Your Honor and Justice, this and Justice that. But they sit there and they ask questions just like any other person. I mean, they're obviously very smart, whether you agree with them or not. They're asking good questions, but they're just engaged in a discussion. And a lot of the discussion I had today, and why I have some hope, is I think they learned some stuff. Like, whether they ultimately agree or disagree with my position, we'll see. But I think that they listened to me when I said to them that the Republican Party is not looking to create ads and simply asking candidates, for their feedback on how to make them more effective. But actually, what the Republican Party wants to do is to simply be the paymaster to pay bills generated by campaigns to allow Republicans to spend more money without really input from the party at all. I think that surprised them. I think it surprised some of the liberal justices, and I definitely surprised some of the conservative justices when I said that, that the effect of this would be to actually weaken parties. They had assumed that we would all be in agreement that this would benefit parties. And I told them that this would weaken parties because it would make parties into this sort of diminished role of paymasters rather than building long-term party infrastructure. They heard it. Now, whether it's persuasive to them or not, whether they credit everything I say, we'll see. But I did think that they were listening. And when you argue in the Supreme Court, that's all I can ask for. The second thing I'd say, Brian, is I don't have the luxury of being a skeptic about the courts. It doesn't mean I'm not a realist about the courts, but my job is to help protect democracy. And the cynics want people like me to believe that the courts are rigged against us. They want us to believe that there is no hope. And that's because if I believed that, I'd stop fighting. I'd stop going to court. But the truth is, I wake up every single day, and my team wakes up every single day and fights in court. My law firm, we have more than 65 pending cases in federal courts and state courts around this country. And so I can't afford to be a cynic. I can't afford to think that there's no chance of winning. I have to go every time into a courtroom and believe that I will fight for the American people. I will fight for voting rights. I'll fight for free and fair elections. I'll fight for campaign finance regulations and laws that Congress has passed that are constitutional and lawful. And so I can't revert back to that mindset.
Yeah. When do you expect that we'll have some decision in this case?
So, like all Supreme Court decisions, we will get it sometime before the end of the term, by the end of June. I suspect this one will probably come a little earlier than the very end of the term. It's a very important case, but it's being argued early in the term. It's not, I think it's going to be contentious. It'll be the most important campaign finance case. Probably won't be the most important democracy case. There are a couple of others that probably will consume that role. One, the Louisiana redistricting case involving the Voting Rights Act. Yeah. And then there's a case that actually I'm involved in that will come up later this spring that is also a voting case in which we are trying to defend a law against attack by the Republican National Committee that involves mail-in balloting. I think that case will probably come further at the end of the term. So, I'm not going to, it's not a guarantee, but I'd suspect sometime in the spring.
And finally, what are the implications if the court rules with you or the court rules against you?
Yeah, so look, if the court rules with us, as broken as the campaign finance system is, it'll be status quo. If the court rules against us, part of the arguments that were made today is that this will open a floodgate of new money in politics. It'll open a floodgate because it means that the parties will be incentivized to pay more and more bills of campaigns, which means there will be more big money that goes into parties. And when I say big money, I don't mean $40,000 checks. I mean $400,000 checks, $1 million checks. These big mega joint fundraising committees that we've seen around presidential campaigns, that will become the norm in House and Senate races. So you're just going to see an explosion of money that comes to the parties. But bigger than that, and more importantly than that, and I think that this is where the Supreme Court justices had some trepidation. It's not like the last group that is going to say they have a right to put millions of dollars into elections were corporations. Now we have the parties. Next will come everybody else, wealthy individuals, hard money PACs, super PACs will want to coordinate with candidates. I mean, this could be the last string or the last thread out of a tapestry that just undermines the campaign finance system, and we just wind up with a completely unregulated system, which would be terrible for democracy.
Well, look, I just want to say on behalf of me and everybody who's watching this right now, who shares this view, is, yet again, thank you for the work that you do defending democracy, not just in the media space with Democracy Docket, which of course is exploding in growth, but also, the dozens and dozens and dozens of cases that you wage across the country. You have somewhere around 60 cases that you're litigating right now. Is that correct?
65, I think.
65 right now, in addition to the more than 60 that you litigated in the aftermath of the 2020 election. And of course, you're arguing multiple times this year in front of the U.S. Supreme Court. So again, for everybody who's watching right now, a small step that we can all take to support one of the fiercest warriors that we have on the left in the pro-democracy coalition is Marc. One of the smallest steps we can take is to sign up for Democracy Docket. So I'm going to put that link right here on the screen and also in the post description of this video. If you are not yet signed up, please go ahead and sign up. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I want to add a point here. I argued this morning in the U.S. Supreme Court, and the first person who I have spoken to about this in the media is you, and doing this interview with you on your YouTube channel, because the truth is that you reach more people than almost anybody else. Whether they have a broadcast license or not, you reach more people than almost anybody else. But also your audience is more engaged and is smarter on these topics because you keep them engaged and you keep them smart on these topics. So I want to thank you for everything you do and thank your audience for everything it does and for the opportunity to talk about this important Supreme Court case. And if you are not already a subscriber to this channel, please become one now. It is, an essential place to keep informed in the fight for democracy in court. Brian and I do this series because this is part of that effort, but there are a number of other really important series, and of course, Brian's everyday, multiple times a day content that he puts out. So thank you for everything you do. Please, everyone, make sure you support this channel, make sure you subscribe to this channel, and make sure you hit the bell to stay informed when there's new content.
I appreciate that. We'll put both links right here on the screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.